My name is Sunil Varghese. I'm the Policy Director at IRAP, or the International Refugee Assistance Project, and I'm really excited to bring you today a great panel of some leaders in states, some key states around our union. Great. So just to start off, I just want to introduce our panelists here. We've got State Senator Andrew Guinardes, who represents New York's 22nd State Senate District, which includes the neighborhoods of Bay Ridge, Bensonhurst, and Manhattan Beach. We also have Senator Ken Bogner of Montana. He represents the southeast part of the state of Montana since 2018. And finally, we have Senator Julie Gonzalez, who's a Democrat serving Northwest and downtown Denver as the senator for Colorado's Senate District 34. So please join me in a virtual thanks for our panelists for joining us. And I'll start with our first question. Over to you, Senator Bogner. This year, you took a step to protect refugee resettlement in your state. And in doing so, you cited your experience as a Marine serving in Iraq and working alongside translators. What do you see are the national security risks of not honoring our allies with resettlement? And do you think your mission would have been successful without the support of local allies?
Thanks, Sunil. Yes, so I enlisted in the Marines right out of high school. And in that 4-year enlistment, I did 2 tours to Iraq, one in 2006 and 2008. In the Marines, I was a combat engineer. So our mission was to go from village to village up and down the Euphrates River and build combat outposts. So whenever we would convoy to each new location, we would have translators attached to us. And then when we'd get to those locations, the infantry units would usually have translators attached to them. And they were very valuable. And not just translating language, but knowing the environment and the culture, and if anything looked out of place. And they would tell us, do this or don't do that, or you shouldn't go there, or I would recommend, doing this instead of that. And they were very valuable to our mission. Now, would the mission not have been successful without them? I don't know. We're Marines. The mission was going to get accomplished. But what they were very successful in is saving us time, resources, making us very efficient. And most importantly, they saved American lives. And they risked their lives for Americans. And there's no reason that they shouldn't have been on the first planes back to the U.S. after their obligation, to protecting Americans and helping us with intel. And the fact that they weren't is very unacceptable and sends, a very poor message to our current allies, our future allies. Why would an individual in an allied nation want to risk their life, their family's lives, giving intel, translating, for our military, if they know the U.S. isn't going to fulfill their obligations in a timely manner? So that sends a very poor message. So this is a big deal, and it is absolutely a national security risk. So this has been unacceptable, needs to change. Just the mere fact that it would save American lives, and it's a very big national security risk. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that experience. And it is a bit troubling to see what's happening, especially as we withdraw from Afghanistan. It seems to be that we are seeing this happen all over again. And before moving on to the next question, maybe if you can just tell me about your experience in Montana and welcoming refugees and maybe Iraqi translators and interpreters into Montana. We heard from Georgette and Boise. What's the experience to the extent that you can speak of refugees coming to Montana?
So I represent Southeast Montana. It's very rural, and we haven't seen any refugees, mainly to the eastern half of the state. They've all been relocated, resettled in western Montana, mostly Missoula, University Town, close to Idaho as well, where there's some big resettlement communities. So in my district, I haven't seen much, but this last legislative session, the money from the feds that passed through the state was threatened. I just seen firsthand how valuable these refugees have been to Montana, the entrepreneurial spirit that they bring. Mayor Wilmot Collins was mentioned in the video before we came on. He's the mayor of Helena. He's served the U.S. Navy Reserve for 2 decades. He's the mayor of Helena, ran for the U.S. Senate. There's a deep love for America, and I'd witnessed that growing up in Montana and really wanted to see that continue on. So we got that money put back into the state budget. I'm really proud of that.
Great, thank you. Thanks for sharing that. Senator Gennardes, in New York, you've been integral in ensuring that infrastructure of refugee resettlement was protected by preserving state funds for long-term programming for refugees. And Senator Bogner just spoke about how important funding is in creating infrastructure. Can you tell us more about the state funds that were preserved, and why is this an important issue for you?
Yeah, well, great. Well, first of all, let me just say thank you so much for allowing me to join you all today, and to my other legislative colleagues. Great to be here with you. In New York, over the last few years, we have started to allocate state funds to help support refugee resettlement agencies. As the senator was talking about how important those efforts are. We started the effort a couple of years ago with $1 million, which really is a drop in the bucket. First, when you think about the size of New York state budget, which this year alone was $212 billion. But also when you think about the numbers of refugees who are resettling in New York, especially upstate New York. So $1 million is great, but nowhere near enough to actually meet the need that we are seeing in communities up and down the state, upstate, downstate, and everywhere in between. This year's budget, we pushed really hard to increase that funding. We initially sought a few $1 million. We were able to secure $3 million to support refugee resettlement agencies, which in turn go to support directly the work done to help resettle and assimilate and integrate refugees who are coming into our state. That $3 million goes a very, very long way towards helping to provide for the institutional and organizational infrastructure to provide direct cash assistance to individuals for that initial startup funding that they need to be able to get their basics, a house, a clothing, food, etc., their documents, you name it. So really very, very proud of that legislative effort. We had made a big push last year as well, but as we all know, the coronavirus last year really upended many states' finances or financial pictures. So we were not able to do this last year, but I'm really, really proud of the fact that this year we were able to more than double, triple, in fact, the amount of state funding going to support these organizations. And I think we're seeing it already pay huge dividends in terms of direct support on the ground to those that need it the most.
Wow, that's pretty amazing. Senator Gennardes, in New York, that was great to hear about the state funds that are that you're able to kind of preserve for programming for refugees. What other policies would you like to see implemented in New York to strengthen support for refugees and refugee resettlement in New York?
Well, one of the things that I think I'm very interested in, kind of seeing evolve, is the allocation of those resources in an equitable way to meet the needs that we are seeing across the state. Certainly a large number of refugees are resettling in the upstate parts of New York, Buffalo, Utica, Rochester, Syracuse, Binghamton, and smaller towns and villages along the way. But we also are seeing a significant number of refugees resettling into New York City, where I happen to represent. And so I think as we look to hopefully keep and increase the funding, one area I think is important to consider is to make sure that we are adequately and equitably supporting all of the different refugee resettlement efforts happening all across the state, first and foremost. And then number two, I think it's thinking about beyond just the basics of resettlement and kind of the fundamentals of resettlement. It's what comes after that. I represent a very immigrant-rich community, in which many homes speak a language other than English as their primary language. And take our school system, for example. Many parents are shut out of the school system, not because they don't care about what's happening in their children's schools, but because our school system, the largest in the country, doesn't do enough to reach parents in their own native language. It's not enough to send a flyer home to someone in a book bag in Spanish or Chinese or Arabic. It really is going above and beyond that to kind of help bridge that literacy gap that exists. And so when we're talking about resettlement and when we're talking about integration, it's not just those first couple months are important, but then what comes after that? What are we doing to make sure that people are not only welcomed with open arms, but then are allowed to kind of seamlessly be able to resume their lives in their new homes with all the things that those of us who are born here or who speak the language well or have access to resources might take for granted. And that's just one example of an area where I think we can do a lot better to help support these families.
Yeah, that's really interesting, and I hear some of those. In my experience, our organization is based in New York, and it's interesting to see all the services that New York City provides, but it's also great to hear all the work that's being done upstate in communities to help refugees integrate all over the state. Um, and Senator Bogner, maybe for you, what messages have you found to resonate with your community in Southeast Montana and statewide? Like, what messages resonate about refugees and help folks understand the need to create welcoming communities for refugees, especially in light of all the rhetoric over the last 4 years?
The best messages have been education and just explaining my experiences with refugees, how they helped Americans, Marines, especially during these last conflicts. My brother as well, he was in Afghanistan, had the same situation, had translators really step up and help Americans. And just explaining that and educating in the community that these people have sacrificed to get here and that they really have a deep love for this country. Other messages that really resonate are explaining the entrepreneurial spirit of refugees. They really, once they get to these communities, they step up, they want to be a part of the communities, they want to be Americans. And they've been yearning for an opportunity to really display their skills and make a living for themselves. And just explaining that to my community has gone a long ways, and them being open to bringing in these refugees, especially being in a very rural district. We've lost a lot of population in the last decade, and we need people to step up in these communities to come in and take over for an aging population and a population that's leaving. So just explaining kind of the situation has really resonated, and it's exciting to see the response.
That's great to hear. A lot of times maybe we hear a lot from folks on both coasts. I grew up in Texas in a kind of an immigrant community, but mostly populated by a lot of children and refugees themselves from Vietnam. We had folks from Kosovo in our neighborhood, just folks from all over. And those kind of the themes that you mentioned, the entrepreneurial spirit and the kind of patriotism and just desire to be American, really, I saw that firsthand in Texas. Similarly, maybe going to you, Senator Gonzalez, I think we have you on audio now. And I just want to go back to that question that in Colorado, you were the Senate sponsor for legislation to open an Office of New Americans in the state. Can you tell us about that initiative and why it was important to you and Coloradans?
I'm really going to hope that you can hear me this time. Can you hear me?
We can. Thank you.
Y'all, let this be a lesson that sometimes, 15 months into, 18 months into a pandemic, we still have things to learn. And sometimes, you got to try multiple times to make things work and be flexible. But I just want to appreciate the question and send so much gratitude to the organizations who have been promoting immigrant integration and refugee resettlement in Colorado for years, for decades, quite frankly, because they have laid the groundwork over the course of so many years of work to now be able to concretize that work into what is now House Bill 1150, creating the Office of New Americans in the state of Colorado's Department of Labor and Employment. We know that Colorado's history is is that of both, understanding and recognizing the Native peoples who have been here, while also acknowledging that a lot of the state of Colorado was once Mexico, right? And yet we have that long-standing sort of old school Chicano community, and we also have a thriving and diverse and vibrant immigrant and refugee community. We know that 1 in 10 Coloradans is an immigrant, and over 600,000 Coloradans are native-born Americans with at least one immigrant parent, meaning the mixed status families within Colorado represents just a huge diversity and wealth of experience. What we've heard from some of the legislators and elected officials who maybe weren't as familiar with the immigrant community was that they thought that the immigrant community and refugee folks were isolated and separated out from the rest of Colorado's economy or schools or churches or what have you. And yet being able to demonstrate the interconnectedness of our community, and now through this creation of our office, we'll be able to promote a statewide strategy and some overarching state-level coordination to ensure that economic stability, to ensure that integration, and to ensure that we're also doing what we can as a state to make sure that things are, that resources are accessible and translated and getting to communities who need them most in ways that are culturally relevant and competent, understanding the breadth and diversity of our immigrant community. We know that there's such power and such potential here at the statewide Office of New Americans that will be possible. I'm really excited to see this bill being signed into law.
That's great. It's a great development, and we're looking forward to seeing the benefits of the legislation. So in addition to ensuring that refugees and other immigrant newcomers have their basic needs met, why is it important to focus and support efforts to increase successful long-term integration beyond the kind of short-term basic needs? And that's, I guess you can take that first, Senator Gonzalez.
That the pandemic itself and the multiple ensuing crises that we've seen in terms of both the pandemic as well as the economic impacts, as well as the racial reckoning, has laid bare so many disparities that exist within our systems. And if we know that crisis exacerbates inequality, we have to do the work intentionally to ensure that we are addressing those barriers and that we're providing meaningful access and working towards equitable systems. And so that's really what this Office of New Americans is built to do, is to not just say, hey, we have all of the answers, but instead, we as state government leaders, for example, have all the answers. But it's instead to create a platform and an opportunity for immigrants and refugees and the organizations that work alongside them to say, hey, here is what we're seeing. Here's how we think that government can be more effective and responsive. And I'm really, the potential there is so exciting, both in terms of addressing and closing systemic gaps in educational equity. In terms of vaccine access, there's so much there. And we also know, and I heard my colleagues also speak to this, about the potential economic benefits, just knowing and nurturing that entrepreneurial spirit that so many immigrants and refugees have. There's so much opportunity for us to grow and do better.
Got it. Thank you. And Senator Granades in New York, what kind of maybe share your reflections on the need to focus and support successful long-term integration of refugees in New York and elsewhere?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think Senator Gonzalez really touched on it. A good part of it. It's the same story everywhere. This is about economic development. This is about social justice. This is about economic justice. This is about so many things that will help impact not just the refugees who are coming here, but the community that they're coming to. Here in New York City, 47% of our small businesses are owned by immigrant entrepreneurs. The individuals who are coming to this country as refugees, are not in our minds. Oftentimes, we think of them at their worst when they are fleeing, war or poverty or famine or some other type of hardship, and they come to us in, destitute. But they all in their countries are doctors, engineers, educators, business owners, and so it is really about transferring them from where they were coming from to where they are now residing, and helping them get situated in a way that allows them to continue with the arc of their lives in a place that's welcoming and safe and hospitable. So when I look at a place like New York City that has, like I said, nearly 50% of our business owners are immigrant business owners, that's really significant. So it's not just about helping someone have a place to live for a few months. It's about how are we now creating a new business in the community that is now going to be hiring 2 or 3 other people in the community. That's going to be recycling money back into our local economy. That's going to be used to create a tax base that's going to support our public schools and our public infrastructure. That's really, I think, the importance of the long-term resettlement efforts here. And that's why, as I was saying to your question earlier, it's really beyond just the initial resettlement efforts. It really is kind of laying the foundation for long-term success of integration here, regardless of where someone might be coming from or what circumstances they might be coming from. That is kind of secondary in many ways. It's about giving them the platform and the opportunity to have a really successful and productive life here in the United States.
Got it. Thank you. It's interesting to hear what's happening in Colorado and Denver, especially as Denver itself is kind of a booming area. New York City and New York has historically been a place where refugees arrived. And not to, focus, I'm just curious, Senator Bogner in Montana, like what would you tell your colleagues? What would you share with folks in Montana and elsewhere on why immigrants and refugees should come to Montana, and what can Montana do to increase the immigrants and refugees moving to Montana? And I think about post-pandemic, the job market, especially with so many unfilled vacancies. And so, more than usual, immigrants may have a chance to kind of forum shop a bit. So why Montana?
Opportunity. As I mentioned earlier, Montana, especially rural Montana, has an aging population. They have a population that's declining in these rural livestock farming communities, these ag communities. And there's a need for people to come in, step up in these communities, and now there's just the perfect opportunity to bring in people that are yearning to make a living on their own. It's just the perfect time, the perfect location. And this is, basically what I've been trying, I guess, in the last year with the refugee money being threatened in our state budget to really get the point across is we need these people in our community. They're just going to make us stronger. And just getting that across has been, I guess, really resonated, but exciting because people are starting to get it. Like, this is the population that can come in, supplement the rural areas that are declining, and really just make us a stronger community and a stronger state.
Got it. Yeah, that's it's a compelling argument, and I can totally see how in a place like Montana, refugees can not only find jobs, but maybe a welcoming community that's kind of new to a lot of different populations and communities looking for an area, a new place to make their home. So we've got just a few minutes left, and I just want to go around and give everyone a chance to just kind of provide any closing reflections, specifically on this theme. It's not lost on me that so much of the refugee conversation and the conversation around immigration centers around Washington, D.C., and what the federal government can do. And maybe not enough attention is paid to the importance of states and local communities. And I hope the folks that attended today's panel kind of are getting a good idea of the importance and what states can do. So just with that, I'm just going to go around and starting with you, Senator Gonzalez, on any final closing reflections and comments you might have.
Certainly. I'll just say that prior to serving here in the Colorado State Senate, I actually worked as a paralegal in an immigration and criminal defense law firm during both the Obama and Trump administrations. And so knowing and acknowledging that, that the immigrant community and the refugee community has really been frustrated by the lack of meaningful action in Congress. I think it has become more of our responsibility in the states and in local communities to step up. The Office of New Americans really built upon some of the work that the city and county of Denver did in terms of establishing an Office of Immigrant and Refugee Affairs. The city of Littleton and other communities who were doing the work of integration, so our statewide office is building off of that work, and we are getting things done in a bipartisan way that, quite frankly, I wish Congress would be able to do as well. We are making it happen, and we are getting it done because we understand just how important it is for the well-being of our constituents. That's the work ahead, and I'm so honored to be a part of this panel to talk about it.
Great, thank you. And Senator Granardes.
Thank you. I think the immediate benefits and significance of supporting resettlement programs or just welcoming refugees, first and foremost, is really speaks for itself in many ways, and in all of our communities that we represent, 3 different types of communities, and that's really, really important. But for me personally, it goes beyond just the economic impact or the direct, immediate, practical effect that it has. It's about values. And, I come from a Greek family. I'm 4th generation Greek American, in this country. My great grandparents left Greece, more than 100 years ago. And I was always raised with this notion, this Greek idea of philoxenia, which means love of strangers, friend to the strangers. And at its very basic, that word means that we have an obligation to our fellow human beings, regardless of who they are, or where they come from, or when they come here, or what God they pray to, or who they love, or what the color of their skin is, or what they believe. Just because they're human, we have an obligation to them. And that, more than anything else, I think is what motivates me to be so passionate about this particular part of my work in terms of supporting refugees who are coming here, in search of a better life. Because 100 years ago, it were Greek Americans who were refugees coming to this country in search of a better life, in search of economic opportunity, in search of freedom. And this is a continual story of, constant change. And so it is my responsibility, or our responsibility, to honor that history, regardless of what your personal story is, and then make sure that you are not pulling the ladder up behind you on your way up yourself, and that you are extending a hand behind you to bring someone up along with you. And that, I think, is something that it's very important not to lose sight of. Obviously the economic benefits are incredibly important, and that's really kind of what we talk about and we tout as successful. But we shouldn't ignore the moral imperative here to do what is right by people who are facing the most abject and most devastating circumstances that you or I or any of us might never be able to fathom. And so it's important that we keep both of those in mind, and that's going to be how I'm going to continue working in this space and with great organizations like the IRC and others to make sure that we continue to support these communities in that way.
Great, thank you. And Senator Bogner, to you.
In the last 4, 5, 6 years, the conversation around refugees and immigration has become very passionate, and it's very easy for people on either side or whatever side they believe regarding this conversation to just go right to name calling because it's easy. And in my position, I've had the most impact not through policy, but through conversation and through education and talking to people that don't necessarily agree with me on certain immigration policy. But just sharing my stories through the military, what I've witnessed in Montana, has changed a lot of minds. So I just encourage everyone out there to have those conversations. They might not be comfortable at first, and try not to delve into name calling or I guess just engage in respectable conversation. It goes such a long ways. It's not always easy, but I've made the most impact by just having those conversations and just sitting down. They're not always fun, but they make the most impact. So I encourage everyone to have those respectable conversations.
Great. Thank you so much. And I just want to just virtually applaud all three of our panelists for this really great and really enlightening conversation. So thank you, and thank you all for participating. And we're not done yet. I want to pass the mic, so you'd say, to Basma Alawi of the Storytellers Collective. And following that, we'll have some updates from IRC offices in Utah and in Utah. So thank you so much, everyone, and talk to you later.